My beautiful soul, welcome. Today, we begin our exploration of the nature of personal reality, discovering how thought and emotion weave the fabric of life. Okay, let's unpack this. We're drawing from a really massive body of guided philosophical teaching. It's a deep inquiry into consciousness, and the intersection of the spiritual and the physical self. Our mission really is to cut through all the information overload out there and grasp the core insights about what it means to be a conscious creator of your daily experience.
And we jump right in with something quite startling, actually, an immediate challenge to, well, external moral authority. The sources dive straight into this core idea of grace versus conscience, and they ask, why might that conscience you are taught be the absolute least reliable guide to fulfillment?
Wow, yeah, that is a bold claim right out of the gate, because we usually think of conscience as, that inner compass, the ultimate guide for right and wrong.
Exactly. But the sources frame it differently. They start by defining the state of grace,
Hmm.
and they present it not as some kind of religious reward, but as a natural, inherent condition of existence. It's just the baseline state of feeling happiness, wholeness, fulfillment, simply because you are. It doesn't require any moral achievement.
Okay, so grace is automatic, it's just there. But conscience, that's learned. Why is that guidance labeled unreliable then?
Well, because that inner voice often isn't really your voice, not originally. The conscience in this context is speaking through the highly fallible, often fear-based voices of those who instilled their specific concepts of morality.
Yeah.
Parents, teachers, clergy, during your childhood. These are basically inherited judgments, not some kind of spontaneous inner wisdom.
Right. And as a child, you don't really have a filter, do you? Before your conscious mind fully forms its own structure, you kind of have to accept those authoritative beliefs. For support, for survival even, you internalize them, whether they're true for you or not. And they carry, well, immense weight.
They absolutely do. Those accepted ideas become the mental and spiritual fabric that you, as an adult, use as the raw material for your reality.
Right.
Think of them like the foundational code. Some of it might fall away over time, sure, but the most restrictive patterns often stick around. They create boundaries around what you believe is possible for you or what you think you deserve in terms of happiness.
Okay, let's take that a step further. Because the sources use the concept of original sin, but in a really unexpected way. To explain the birth of our current consciousness, it moves this ancient myth way beyond simple moral fault. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yes, this symbolic reinterpretation is absolutely central to understanding how the sources view human development. Original sin is redefined, not as a moral failing, not really, but as the moment the self-conscious mind emerged. It represents that crucial separation, the split between the criticizing self and the object being criticized.
Wait, hang on. So the individual rises from what the sources call the being base. What exactly is that? Is that like the collective identity before we became so individual?
Yes, precisely. The being base is described as that earlier state, collective unconscious existence, before the sharp lines of ego and individual identity really formed. The separation is the individual gaining uniqueness, gaining the ability to distinguish me from not me, from the collective, and symbolically separating from the purely earthly, the purely instinctive body.
And the snake in the garden, the traditional tempter figure.
The snake. It symbolizes the appeal of unconscious knowledge. That earlier state of, let's call it knowing unknowingness, where things were just given. You didn't need to strive. You didn't need to critically distinguish between things. It's a seductive pullback to the comfort of pure instinct, you see. By choosing knowledge, humanity gained consciousness, yes, but also the burden of making decisions. And crucially, the burden of internal criticism. The sin, if you want to call it that, is simply the birth of the inner critic.
Got it. So the price, or maybe the consequence, of being a unique, self-aware individual is this constant presence of the inner critic. And that critic is largely powered by these inherited, often unreliable beliefs. Okay, let's make this more concrete. There's an example in the sources, right, about a friend who developed chronic jaw and dental issues. After reading a book on health foods.
Yes, that anecdote is vital because it powerfully illustrates that belief is the key element, much more so than external conditions. This friend accepted the book's rigid premise. Certain foods are good, therefore other foods must be unequivocally bad, toxic, even dangerous. And after eating one of these supposedly bad foods, he immediately manifested physical symptoms. The jaw trouble started right then.
So the sources are clear. It wasn't the food itself. It was the moral judgment he attached to the food. He basically developed an anxiety pattern around eating it.
Exactly. And that anxiety pattern was a direct physical translation of an internal conflict. His avoidance of the food became a symbolic refusal, a refusal to face a deeper underlying belief, maybe a belief rooted in those early inherited teachings about, say, purity or self-control or being good.
And the moment he realized he could eat the food without any negative consequence, it wasn't some sudden biological miracle. It was a profound mental shift. He realized he could actually challenge and face his internal beliefs. And the symptoms just vanished. When that belief structure crumbled, the sources really stress this point. Belief, not the food itself, was the vital element here.
And this demonstrates so clearly the damage caused by what we could call the moral trap,
Hmm.
judging experiences rather than just having them. The sources contrast this rigidity with something like natural healing methods, maybe foot reflexology massage, for example. Massage often works because it treats the body with natural consideration. It promotes relaxation without all that moral baggage. There's no judgment, no good or bad value assigned to the treatment itself. It simply allows the body to find its natural equilibrium again.
So, connecting this to the bigger picture, this explains why the sources are often critical of philosophies that emphasize extreme rigidity or physical denial. Things like harsh asceticism, for instance.
Exactly right. These systems, by denying the body or suggesting that extreme suffering is required for spiritual purity, are ultimately, in this view, denying the self. They're rejecting the soul's core purpose, which the sources say is to experience the world through form, not to reject it. And this kind of denial almost always relies on what the sources call artificial guilt, the idea that the body itself is fundamentally flawed, or maybe even a source of sin.
Okay, let's circle back to the creation myth symbolism for a moment. The sources point out that Eve, who represents the intuitive component, initiates eating the fruit. And then Adam, representing the ego or the self, follows. And the knowledge of good and evil they gain. It doesn't damn them in this interpretation, it merely signifies the birth of choice, the necessity of free will for this new kind of self-conscious species.
Yes, and this new consciousness brought with it massive neurological and biological changes. The sources call it the emergence of the memory mirror. We suddenly gained the ability to recollect past joy, yes, but also, crucially, past pain.
And that ability to reflect changed everything, didn't it? It accelerated the mind's need to constantly correlate past events, present circumstances, and significantly imagine future dangers.
That acceleration puts, and the sources use this phrase, huge pressure on our entire biological structure.
Yeah.
Our bodies evolved to react instantly to a present danger, like a lion appearing right now. But now, with imagination and memory, the body is forced to react constantly to scenarios that might only exist in the mind. The imagined danger of getting sick, or losing money, or being rejected socially.
That sounds exhausting. We're physically reacting to dangers that aren't even real yet.
It is exhausting and stressful. So how do we manage that kind of constant, self-inflicted biological stress? Well, the sources suggest it starts with recognizing the origin of our morality. Those initial categories of good and evil, they actually served a purpose initially. A priceless aid, they call it. They helped make sharp distinctions necessary for immediate survival. Labeling a predator as evil because it kills helped early humans survive. Makes sense.
But those useful distinctions hardened, right, into these restrictive societal belief systems.
Exactly. Which leads to what the sources term global belief climates. Think of them like atmospheric pressure systems, following patterns and laws. Everyone is born into one of these climates, and they're incredibly hard to step outside of because they're constantly reinforced by everyone around you.
Right. And within these climates, you see these dangerous extremes of societal value judgments playing out. Like, look at the belief climate around disease, for example. Sickness is often seen either as a kind of moral defect, right? A source of shame, a sign you failed somehow. Or, conversely, it's seen as necessary and somehow ennobling, like it's needed to save the soul, or the idea that suffering builds character.
Yes. And that idea that suffering builds character is presented here as just another belief climate, possibly designed, maybe unconsciously, to keep people stuck in that artificial guilt. Instead of dealing with the actual issue or recognizing that health might just be the natural state, both extremes, the shame and the glorification, they ignore the true, vast range of human experience and motivations. They just slap these generalized moral judgments onto things, obscuring the unique, personal root of a physical experience.
And you see the same kind of dualism applied ruthlessly to wealth and poverty too, don't you? Belief systems claiming wealth is a direct blessing from God, which inherently makes poor people seem morally deficient somehow.
Right.
And then the flip side, philosophies claiming poverty is inherently virtuous, which then makes wealthy people seem spiritually flawed.
These are generalized moral judgments, and they always seem to involve guilt. They rely on these really simplified concepts of sin and punishment. They completely bypass the natural, self-regulating mechanisms of reality itself. They just make us judge our existence constantly instead of simply experiencing it.
It really feels like the common thread here is this loss of naturalness, this layering on of complex, often self-imposed judgment. And the sources constantly contrast our human fear and this moral baggage with the instinctive nature of animals.
Yes, animals operate very differently in this model. Without that memory mirror driving judgment and self-criticism, they operate from an inborn sense of grace. They seem to understand health and disease as just a natural body rhythm. Disease to them can even serve a life-giving role for the species as a whole, maybe triggering necessary migrations or shifts in the overall pattern of existence. Their instinct guides them perfectly, automatically.
But the human difference, the catch, is that with free will, we have the space to form any conscious belief, including the most devastating ones, like believing we have no value or that we've somehow lost grace permanently. We can actually override that natural instinct.
And that is the fundamental tension of being human, according to these sources. We gain this tremendous creative capacity, this potential, but at the cost of that immediate unconscious certainty that animals possess. The sources give us a really powerful metaphor to kind of synthesize these threads and remind us of what we're perhaps striving to reclaim. It's the image of the migrating wild geese.
Ah, the geese. With their simple yet complex and seemingly perfect migration, their knowledge of exactly when and where to fly is total. It's instinctive. They symbolize that deep, accessible inner freedom and that unerring instinctive knowledge.
Their journey is predictable, it's perfect, because they act completely on that instinctual integrity. Our human journey, though, enabled by self-consciousness and free will, is described as far more unpredictable. It opens up these vast, sometimes chaotic avenues of possibility. We're being called, essentially, to stop following rigid, inherited codes and instead become truly conscious creators in the world we inhabit. We have to learn to consciously recreate the wholeness that the animal possesses unconsciously.
And the ultimate truth the sources seem to provide is, well, fundamentally optimistic, isn't it? They conclude that despite appearances, despite all the guilt we might invent for ourselves, you cannot truly lose the state of grace. And fundamentally, perhaps there is no actual evil.
Apparent opposites are presented as merely different faces of one great drive toward creation.
So the path forward is deeply personal then.
It has to be. The individual must travel through their own inherited beliefs, both rationally and emotionally, until they realize their own original integrity, their own full presence in space and time, that conscious knowledge, that deep realization of fundamental wholeness. That's the human equivalent of the animal's inborn sense of grace.
This deep dive really reminds us, powerfully I think, that we aren't just passive recipients of reality. We are actively materializing our ideas in the flesh. That belief fabric we started talking about, it directly determines the physical symptoms, the boundaries of our experience.
It really demands constant and honest self-examination, especially looking at the oldest stories we tell ourselves, the ones we barely notice anymore.
The sources suggest that this accelerating human consciousness is compelling us, maybe forcing us, to examine the foundational beliefs we hold, including those wrapped up in these ancient myths, like original sin, that we've re-examined today. So as you integrate this deep dive, maybe consider this. Which of your seemingly new beliefs, maybe they come from complex modern philosophies or strict diets or even political dogmas, are actually just old, restrictive concepts dressed up in new clothes, still fundamentally denying the value of your physical existence? What happens when you decide, really decide, to trust your body's wisdom over the world's moral judgments?